Welcome to our course in church history. I'm Dr. James Miller. In this course, we'll do a sweeping exploration of the last 2,000 years, looking at how the church interacted with the cultures and nations around it. We'll see how the story of Jesus grew from a small rural population in the Middle East to a global phenomenon welcoming billions of followers today. We'll discuss the early foundations of theology, mission, and martyrdom that laid the foundation for the church in the first 5 centuries, culminating in the life of Augustine of Hippo. It might be a surprise to some, but we'll discover that the church laid the foundation for the arts and the sciences that exploded out of the Middle Ages. We'll then follow the reformers through a season of upheaval and war that changed the face of Europe. Christianity was a significant voice in the shift to modernity, and we'll see that it remained a countercultural voice in the 20th century through the development of postmodernity, answering a bleak and mechanistic worldview with a promise of hope and love. Church history is the story of God's ongoing interactions with his human creation, a fascinating, passionate, and sometimes embarrassing look at the people of faith. I'm Dr. James Miller. Welcome to Church History.
Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, we basically have no money for these videos.
Dun, 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 dun.
Known as one of the great leaders of the early church, an apostolic father, and a disciple of John who was the beloved disciple of Jesus, Polycarp's name is essential to the story of the early church. He defended early Christian doctrine against heresy, lived an influential life of holiness, and died as a martyr for his faith in around 155 AD, at around the age of 86. Some of Polycarp's significance comes from his proximity to Jesus. Jesus mentored John, who mentored Polycarp. We know this from the writings of one of Polycarp's students, another influential early church father, Irenaeus. Irenaeus writes of Polycarp, "For when I was a boy, I saw you in Lower Asia with Polycarp, moving in splendor in the royal court and endeavoring to gain his approval. I remember the events of that time more clearly than those of recent years. For what boys learn, growing with their mind, becomes joined to it." See, he's gotten older and he's forgetting some of his more recent memories, but he says he remembers clearly what he saw as a boy. "So that I am able to describe the very place in which the blessed Polycarp sat as he discoursed, and his goings out and comings in, and the manner of his life, and his physical appearance, and his discourses to the people, and the accounts which he gave of his intercourse with John." So, in other words, Irenaeus remembers Polycarp talking about his conversations with John, the disciple of Jesus, and with the others who had seen the Lord. And as he remembered their words, and what he heard from them concerning the Lord, and concerning his miracles and his teaching, having received them from eyewitnesses of the word of life, Polycarp related all things in harmony with the scriptures. Some of Polycarp's significance comes from the fact that we have one letter from him, his letter to the Philippians. It's an amazing lens into the historical context of the early church. He praises those who are suffering under persecution for Jesus, probably under Emperor Domitian. He says their chains are the appropriate jewelry of the saints. The letter also shows us some of the doctrines and virtues of the early church. Polycarp quotes extensively from the scriptures, showing that the early Christians were already using and regarding as high authority the letters of Matthew, perhaps Mark, Luke, Acts, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, 1st Thessalonians, 1st Peter, 1st John, and Jude. Now, scholars agree that the letter is authentic, though it may be a combination of 2 letters written by Polycarp at different times, around 130 and 150 AD. Nonetheless, it is widely believed that these are the writings of Polycarp, dated from the early 2nd century. This serves to dispel any nonsense about the books of the Bible being written at a much later date. Polycarp, who studied under John, is aware of all of these letters. This means they're in circulation widely in the early church within 2 generations after Jesus. In terms of doctrine, he talks about the resurrection of Jesus, the resurrection of the dead generally, the final judgment, salvation through belief and faithful living. He goes through a list of virtues appropriate to widows, virgins, young men, wives, children, presbyters, and deacons. Some of Polycarp's significance comes from the fact that he died a martyr for the faith. This story is captured in a document known as the Martyrdom of Polycarp, which itself says was originally written by Irenaeus and then copied by other church leaders. The document contains one of the early descriptions of Christian martyrdom outside the scriptures, one of the earliest outside of the scriptures. In his letter, Polycarp commended patience in the face of persecution, referencing the deaths of the Apostle Paul and his friend Ignatius of Antioch. Apparently, Polycarp refused to burn incense to the emperor and refer to Caesar as Lord. It was not uncommon for the Caesars to declare themselves to be deities worthy of worship, and temples had been erected for emperor worship. The story goes that when Roman guards came to arrest Polycarp, he served them a meal and only asked to pray before they took him. He then prayed for 2 hours. They went to burn him at the stake, and when his body would not burn, they stabbed him with a spear, and the story goes that his blood extinguished the fire. Of his life, we know little other than this. At one point, he engaged with another bishop about the dating of Easter, but the two did not come to an agreement, and to this day, Easter is still celebrated on different dates by different wings of the Christian church. We know that he challenged Marcion, an early church heretic who would later be excommunicated by the church. Polycarp referred to him as the firstborn son of Satan. We don't know a lot about him, but for his place in church history, he is an invaluable lens as to what the early Christians admired and remembered. For that, he will always be an early chapter in the story of the Christian church.